also spends a large amount of his time imagining the medicine of tomorrow with synergy between human expertise and machine learning. He's the Dean of Life Sciences and Health Research at the prestigious Ashoka University. He's the head of the Koita Center for Digital Health at Ashoka and was the director of the CSIR Institute of Genomics and Integrative Biology. Incidentally, Anurag graduated from AIMS Delhi and went on to train in internal medicine at the Baylor College of Medicine in Houston, Texas, and also taught there for a while. He also holds a PhD in physiology from the Delhi University. He's a Shanti Swarup Bhatnagar Awardee and a fellow of the Wellcome Trust DBT India Alliance. He sits on many advisory and steering committees of the WHO and the Government of India and represents India in the Global Partnership for Responsible. In his spare time, he likes to chill with his family and friends and enjoys good food. He plans to write a book one day, but for now will settle for reading. He's married to Anjali Agrawal, who incidentally is a former resident of our department as a radiologist and now practices teleradiology. When I asked Anjali to describe Anurag in one word, guess what is that word she said? Extraordinary. So you've done some wonderful work, Anurag. To get that from a spouse, I think in this day and age is quite a dramatic achievement. He's blessed with two daughters, Disha and Ira, who are studying to be doctors. The topic that Anurag has chosen for today's lecture is From Bots to Robots, the future of AI in healthcare. Incidentally, we are holding this lecture in the month when the Nobel Prize for Physics has been awarded to people who did groundbreaking research, which led to machine learning and artificial intelligence. So welcome, Anurag. Pleasure to have you here, and the floor is all yours.
Thank you so much, Raju. It's an absolute honor to be here. And as I put up my slides, I would like to really
I think you're muted, sir. Unmute yourself, sir.
My slides are visible?
Yes, the slide is visible.
Okay, fantastic. So I think you already heard about the Nobel Prize for this year in physics. And one of the two was Geoff Hinton, who made some very provocative statements about radiology and radiologists. But perhaps even more interestingly, the Nobel Prize in chemistry was also shared by AI people. And one of these two people is Demis Hassabis, who started the company DeepMind, later on bought by Google. And I'll tell you in a second why that is so interesting. So there is a webcomic of romance, sarcasm, maths, and language called XKCD. And many years ago, it had a cartoon. In this cartoon, you will all notice medicine, by the way, is not there, but they arranged the fields by purity. And they could point out that, chemists laugh at biologists, who laugh at psychologists, who laugh at sociologists. But in the end, at one corner, lie the mathematicians. These mathematicians think that's the end of everything. So just recently, after the Nobel Prize, the XKCD website has an update with AI at the extreme right, talking about the fact that whether it is physics, whether it is chemistry, AI roots. But let's come back to this very controversial statement that Geoff Hinton made about radiology. For those of you familiar with the cartoon character, Wile E. Coyote, he never knows when he's over the edge of the cliff, then suddenly falls down. So he talked about why people should stop training radiologists. It was obvious to him in 2016 that in 5 years, deep learning was going to do better than radiologists. And clearly, we are 8 years down, and clearly that has not occurred. And he did get the Nobel, so one would imagine he understands what AI is about. So let's examine, as we go through today's talk, what's coming. Very similarly, Demis has also recently made a very interesting quote. Now, what happened is a lab called Isomorphic Labs got spun out of Google, which takes into account DeepMind, and Demis is the CEO. And his keywords are that just as mathematics turned out to be the language of physics, today you don't talk physics, you write equations. You can't imagine the way Einstein did, people sitting on a light beam looking at collapsing fields. He thinks AI will prove to be the right method for understanding biology. But to those of us who have been following this field for a long time, a lot of it sounds like deja vu. Back in 1970, this was an article from the New England Journal, The Promise and Problems of Change by Bill Schwartz. And the last line that I'll only read out for you, you can see the rest, is largely replacing the intellectual functions of the physician. So back in 1970s, when computers are young, people are already starting to imagine that physicians are gone. And 70 years down, we are almost there. But there is something to be said about what we are seeing today, and that is the pace at which things are happening. Not too far back, 2015, DeepMind was just a gamer kit. What Demis did, along with his partners, including Suleiman Mustafa, who's written a very nice book recently on AI, is somewhat black perspective and the challenges and the fears. But at that time, they trained AI to play 49 different video games. They are watching the screen just like a human would watch. They're not inside the machine, and beating a professional player's top score in 23 of them. But the key thing was that they said, given any game in which the rules are defined and victory is defined, it can automatically figure out which actions produce the best strategy. Now, this was amazing because it's not just about video games. It's about anything, right? It's true for video games. It's true for chess. It's true for anything that involves some kind of a strategy. As long as there is a victory definition, as long as there are rules that can be followed, the computer figures out the rest. Absolutely pathbreaking. And what we saw at that point was that we were starting to move towards general AI. Before this, one of the best examples that we had was Deep Blue. Now, this is the cover page from a very famous match. This is the match between Garry Kasparov and Deep Blue 2, and they're trying to play chess. And you know what happened. You know that Deep Blue won. Now, Kasparov writes a book about it called Deep Thinking, and he spends most of the book talking about how he was done in by people scheming against him. But even he acknowledges in the book that even if he had won that particular year, he knew he would not win the next time. But what was Deep Blue? Deep Blue was a computer trained only to play chess. And if Kasparov is correct, it was trained to play Kasparov. Was it truly intelligent? Probably not. DeepMind, on the other hand, changed the game completely. Beyond chess, there is a game called Go. Now, Go winners are called artists. They can't describe why they make the move they make. And people thought the time when a computer would beat a human in the game of Go was not going to be anytime soon. Yet, soon after DeepMind started winning the games of video games, it also wrote a program called AlphaGo, which made the cover page of Nature because this was so historic, that beat the world's number 2 human player, Lee Sedol. The number 1 player then refused to play after that. So we cannot say that DeepMind beat the world's number 1 player, but I think that everybody knows what would have occurred. And the key point was that the move that every expert described as a bad move, that the computer should not have made, turned out to be the critical move that led to its victory in that first game. So which means it could see things that we did not even know were good strategy. So it can think differently. And of course, one of the apex achievements in this area of playing games came in 2017, when a program called Alpha Zero, which was trained to play chess, but never got a chance to watch a single game, simply played itself over and over and over again, and after 4 hours, it beat the top chess playing program in the world. And at this point, we're not even speaking human grandmasters, because everybody knows that a top level chess program will beat every grandmaster. And the scoreline was 64-36-0, which if you play chess, will see how remarkable that is. Now, it's only a question of what you apply this kind of capacity to. Why can't you make the structure of a protein, the folding of amino acids, a game? You can define victory. Victory can be coming close to the correct structure as defined on X-ray crystallography. You can create competitions. You can set up the rules of the game that this is the only way by which we know amino acids fold. And very soon, a gamer becomes a scientist. In the first competition that was held, where the world's top teams collaborated. So every year what happens is that there are some new proteins whose structure has been solved. The world doesn't know. Everybody just gets a sequence. They try to predict the structure. In the end, in the competition called CASP, they open it up and see who won. And to the great surprise of people, the first time DeepMind participated using a program called AlphaFold, it beat all the top human teams of the world, including people who had been doing protein structure for a living for decades. Now, this again was incredible because this held the opportunity to transform biology. And today we are on version 3. Almost every protein for which we don't have real structures through crystals has now been folded inside a computer. At this point, we didn't have LLMs. Almost everything that you are hearing me talk about was through something called deep learning. But deep learning was not capable of great text responses. It couldn't run a chatbot that you could not distinguish from a human being. Those of you who know about the Turing test, it is basically there's a curtain separating you from somebody on the other side. And over the course of a conversation, you could not tell whether it was a human being or a computer. Well, then the Turing test has been broken. LLMs were the beginning of this. Here is a very nice X thread from Robert Morris, who provided mental health support to many people. Typically, it's human beings answering questions. And he decided to use GPT-3, and we are today at GPT-4o, and the next one's also coming. Mental health support being provided to people was switched over from real human beings to only GPT-3 answering. What they found surprisingly was that not only did the response time become shorter, that you would expect, the satisfaction also went up. So patients texting about mental health support issues found the responses being given by a computer to be superior until the time they got to know it was a computer. The minute they were informed that they were speaking to a computer, their satisfaction with the responses dropped. And you'd expect that. What does a computer really mean when it says, I understand, I care? Let's take another angle. Let's take the angle of passing medical school exam as a criteria to be a good doctor. And we know this occurred, but look at the next slide. Look at the scores MedPalm 2 is achieving. On multi-med QA, where the typical human is somewhere between 50 and 60, and passing score is in the same area, MedPalm 2 is scoring in the range that no human has ever scored. And we can also ask the question in a slightly different way. We can take 1066 consumer medical questions, now we're on the right-hand side, and we can ask a panel of physicians to rate the answers either by MedPalm 2 or by a human being on multiple aspects. You can do high-quality traits and risky traits. So the way this graph is built is yellow is the MedPalm 2 wins, blue is the human wins, and the middle is nobody wins. And you can very clearly say that on the high-quality side, the yellow bars are clearly bigger, which means more often than not, the physician panel rated the answer to a consumer medical question by the computer as better. And on the other side of risky answers, the humans actually were worse on everything except one thing: more inaccurate, irrelevant information. But again, one could say at this point that this is not real life. In real life, you don't get everything packaged into a simple question that you need to answer with all the relevant information inside it. In real life, you have to interact with the patient, you have to extract the information, you have to reach a diagnosis, you have to come up with a management plan, and sometimes you have to recommend escalations. So this is another phenomenal paper that just came out recently, again from DeepMind, by the way. And no, I do not own any DeepMind stocks. And this is AMI, Articulate Medical Intelligence Explorer, an AI that has not actually been trained on any real clinical conversations between physicians and patients, simply trained on simulated synthetic conversations. And I'm going to come back to this synthetic data business again, but note for the purpose of this slide, everything that AMI was trained on was synthetic conversations imagined by a computer between a patient and their doctor. And after that was done, they were set together for 100 case examinations with a patient actor, India, Canada, and UK. So again, a geographical diversity. At the end of the conversation with the patient actor, and the patient actor doesn't know, are they interacting with the primary care physicians? Are they interacting with an AI? Two different people would provide opinions. The patient actor would rate on things like empathy, openness, honesty. And a specialist physician would rate on diagnostic accuracy, management plan, and escalation recommendation. If you were to just look at the radar plot, you will see the pink, which is AMI, is always as good or better than the primary care physician who's human. And in one particular direction, empathy, it is far, far superior to the human physician. Now, this again makes no sense. What does it mean when you say a doctor is empathetic? But this is something that you learn, especially when you train outside India. They teach you how to sound empathetic while speaking to patients. So empathy of a conversation with patients is a set of rehearsed behaviors that obviously a computer can do better. And the same thing has now come out in a recent JAMA paper, and then two other papers, again and again showing that in interactions with AI versus humans, perception of empathy is superior with AIs. And I'm going to spend very little time on computer vision, which is perhaps the most relevant thing to radiology. And even there, I'm going to start with this very famous paper on diabetic retinopathy, in which the computer turned out to be very good at classifying diabetic retinopathy. But what was even more interesting in this particular paper to me was not about retinopathy at all. It was about the fact it was excellent at predicting age, and you can see some of these things listed over here, predicting smoking status, predicting gender. Now, I don't know if any ophtha friend of mine can tell the gender of a patient after looking into their eyes. And this is something that is actually not easily understandable regarding what kinds of patterns is AI able to see. And this, of course, was a very large training data set of between 30 to 50,000 images. But perhaps there are differences. There are many other gender differences. There must be here as well. But in some areas, computers and AI can do things we simply can't imagine. X-rays, of course, is not as difficult a problem in some ways and a very difficult problem in other ways, because interpreting an X-ray requires clinical context. Many different pathologies can remain the same. But if we were to restrict ourselves to very specific things, findings, the recent QXR by Cure.ai, one of the Indian leading companies and also a partner to AIMS for some of its activities, has done quite well, actually. And I will point out right here, before any of you think it, X-rays by themselves do not diagnose tuberculosis, but yes, they can be used to screen for tuberculosis in the right clinical context, and humans are still there in the loop. But here is a paper by Sia et al. In Lancet in 2021. What they did is they developed an ontology tree with 127 clinical findings that can be found on an X-ray. Now, I can't tell any one of you what these 127 might be. I'll just, as a matter of faith, I've taken that there are 127 clinical findings on chest X-rays. And what they found is that the model, AI model alone, was more accurate than unassisted radiologists for 117 out of 127 findings, which basically means if the model does not find the finding, it's unlikely the finding is there, which ultimately translates to if the AI model says the X-ray is normal, you can believe the X-ray is normal, even if no human is looking at it. The second part of this paper, of course, show that assisted radiologists do better than AI, which is very relevant again, but AI alone is superior to radiologists in some areas, and particularly for excluding an abnormality from a film, which has led in Europe to a company called Occiput being allowed to report normal X-rays with no human having seen the X-ray. And that's an important step as we move towards autonomous AIs. And this is basically what I was talking about. Occiput awarded CE mark for the first autonomous AI medical imaging application. These slides are very, very recent. So recent, they are only put in today morning because I was thinking about this. At least some of you, when you think about AI and health, would be thinking about, can AI help you in publishing? And that's, by the way, a talk I'm going to give for another AIMS friend of mine, Dr. Rajiv Gupta, in his virology meeting. So what's new? Many AI tools have been around for a long time, right? I mean, we've had grammar checkers, spelling checkers. They're also AI at some level. But today, generative AI, Gen AI, is taking over content creation and publishing. The hope of everybody is you just tell the AI roughly what to do. You sit back, have a coffee, or you go about your essential work if you're a doctor, and you hope that AI will take care of all that mundane stuff for you. In fact, I can tell you for certain, most content creation will be AI generated or touched within the next few years, and scientific publishing will not be an exception. It can also introduce nice images. By the way, this image on the right was made by GPT-4o today. I instructed it to make a computer of a radiologist reading X-rays while the computer writes the paper. I don't have an actual example of that because I couldn't immediately find data for a radiology paper. But what I did do is I took data for a paper that my daughter recently wrote. And this is a very simple paper with a descriptive composition of central health committees since independence, member-wise gender affiliation qualification. It's basically an Excel sheet. Every committee of the central government since independence, every member, all the data for every member. This was my prompt to GPT-4o. I have collected the data for health committees in India and would like to write a manuscript about the composition and its change over time. Can you help? Immediately, on the left-hand side, you can see that GPT read the data sheet, quickly came out, described it, talked about the manuscript tables, talked about the committees, and gave me an idea that to proceed with my manuscript that is yet to be written, GPT can analyze the composition of committees over time in areas like gender diversity, geographical diversity, health experience, and representation of medical professionals. Incidentally, GPT has not seen the paper that's already written, and the paper does exactly this, right? So this is two independent people thinking the same directions. It also identified new things, identified trends like shifts in mandates or recommendations from committees that the human authors on the right-hand side did not necessarily think of. I'm not going to bore you through an entire manuscript, but I do want you to take a minute to just look at the draft it generated within a few minutes. The title, the abstract, the keywords, and while I give you 30 seconds, evolving composition of health committees in India, analyzing gender geographic trends. The first author of the previous paper thought this was actually a very good description of what they actually did. Look, do note, the graph it generated was terrible. This is a terrible figure one. It basically shows the yellow bar, which has female chairperson of committees are very few compared to male leaders. It does make the point somewhere else that even where the female chaired a committee, they were typically nursing committees. So this is an important graph, although the presentation could be much, much better. But I do want you to see the quality of the results and the fact that even figures were auto-generated. Now, this is almost frightening at one level. I must say this. It's almost frightening that you can just input a full Excel sheet. Of course, a lot of effort goes into producing an Excel sheet like this. But something that reads like a very nice paper that, if I was a reviewer, I would probably accept, comes straight out in 10 minutes flat. I'm going to come back to this particular topic because it is so important to health research later on. But I want to digress a little bit further along and going to talk about how AI is so much bigger than what we typically see as healthcare. For example, language models are thought to be for sentences, but a protein is a sentence of amino acids. The same logic that allows an English sentence to have a meaning gives a protein sequence a function. So it is not just not impossible. In fact, it is already happening that protein language models are creating new proteins with brand new functions. Chemical language models are creating new chemicals with brand new functions. And we are starting to discover brand new antibiotics. What we are realizing is that the applications of this generative AI is just incredible. And here is a custom designed antibiotic specifically targeting Acetylnitrobaumanine while not touching E. coli, which is also gram-negative, or a Staph aureus. So we are starting to see this kind of stuff happen in health, which is going to transform the field forever. And although surgeons might think that they are very, very safe for the time to come, the reality is now we are going from motion to motion, robotic surgery, then motion thought. I will show you an example of Neuralink. We are now also going to language to motion. We are moving to robotic surgeons that can do self-planned sequences. There is still a lot of work to go, but this particular model is thought to be one of the biggest advances in the world of robotic surgeries. Small incisions, better vision, can do complicated actions, and might, with rapid advances in AI, become semi-autonomous. Some of you who follow this area very strongly might also be aware of Noland Arbog, the first patient who got Neuralink. Now, Noland is completely paralyzed. So with this chip inserted directly into his brain and connected over there, again, very difficult to do. They had to invent a robotic surgeon just to do this implantation. And within 1 month, there were some complications. But with this chip implanted in his brain, he could learn to control a computer interface and use it to play chess and to interact with the world. The challenge, after 1 month, they had to redo it. And whatever he had learned had to be relearned all over again because the connections changed. And there are many other examples of walking naturally after spinal cord injury using a brain-spine interface, where an AI reads the signals coming out of the brain, figures out what is it that you want to do, and then makes the exoskeleton below the spine make those actions. Very similarly, there's a neuro process for speech decoding and avatar control. You think about what you want to say, it learns after some training, and then speaks it out for you. These are all recent articles within the last year or so, and the rate at which the field is changing is absolutely incredible. But let me also take you to the dark side. Gen AI is extremely capable because it is extremely flexible. But this flexibility can also be a weakness. There's a very nice article on the great AI hallucinations. I'll show you some practical examples from our own work. So we have access to very large number of medical records that we are trying to extract meaning from. I'll not tell you we've extracted the meaning, we are in the process. But take something as simple as the one in the top. It's a nice digital prescription, everything nicely typed. But let's say I want to extract it to a table that looks like the ground truth over here. You would imagine it should be straightforward. It mostly is. But look at the red line in the bottom, D-rise D3 capsule 1 month. It's not even there. It got the uprise right. But on its own, it added D-rise. In this particular example, the series that we did, we found almost 16% hallucinations by LLMs while trying to import medical records. And these were good quality digital medical records. Of course, best quality would be if people had used the actual drop-down boxes to enter the medication, but that doesn't happen. In India, almost everything that you want to know is in the other section where the physician writes the note. There are lots of radiologists in the room. I think you'll all be blown away by this one. I was testing out the latest version of GPT-4o for something. It read the image with opacities, which I'm not disputing, but very clearly said no pleural effusion are evident. I actually asked it because, sometimes if you check it, it will recorrect itself. And of course, I don't need these bars for you guys. And these were for a different audience that did not know what an effusion was. But look at the response back. It talks all the right things. Upon closer examination, the areas around the costophrenic angles, which are the locations for effusion, are somewhat obscured. It almost sounds like a medical student who has missed a major finding, trying to defend themselves and kind of hedge around the answer to get a passing mark on the Viva. And that's exactly how it works. These kinds of things also occur. So while in some ways, and this would not have occurred, for example, in a well-trained QXR, this is not the type of mistake QXR would make, but QXR is not Gen AI. Gen AI is very good at other things, but makes terrible mistakes on things like this. But I want to leave you with one last example. Purely out of science and not trying to cheat, I input the board on the right for a white to win strategy. And it gave me a very quick strategy with great explanations as well. Why, I should move my knight in a particular way, what would it do? And I really couldn't make any sense out of it. So I asked, what's the board position? And GPT-4o gets the board position wrong. Again, it's not something that will occur every time, but you will not know when it's going to occur. So medicine requires trust. Same way it requires trust that your doctor is not on drugs, it requires trust that your AI is not hallucinating. So especially in scientific research, in the age of generative AI, PNAS very recently came out with a statement of protecting integrity, transparent disclosures and attribution, verification of all AI-generated content, documentation of data, focus on ethics. In clinical practice, what does it translate to? Simply means human must always be an active member of the loop. There is nothing called autonomous generative AI at this point in time. There can be autonomous old-fashioned AI, which deep learning represents, and convolutional neural networks, CNNs also represent, the type of things that you saw in the QXR. Yes, you can do that, but you can't use the most modern cutting-edge AI for medical purposes yet, leaving doctors outside the loop. It's a bit of a quibble, but it's important because the most important fundamental of AI health is the better half in AI health. The goal is to improve healthcare. It's not a game. And the massive amount of data that you need is personal data. And the trouble with data is that even if you have it, you can't always trust it. Respect for human autonomy, privacy, ethics are fundamental. None are algorithm-based. An unbiased collection of biased data does not eliminate bias. Even activation maps that people use to create understandable AI in radiology tells you where the AI is looking, but not always what it is seeing. And that there too, people have been burnt badly. As I wind down, I'm going to give you a few examples that will make you think about the data side of the problem. There is a very famous algorithm that is used in the US to determine which person gets more care. So the more sick you are, the higher your score will be on the x-axis. And what they find is that when you compare black people with the dark bar with white people in the yellow bar, black people have to be sicker to get exactly the same score. Now, nobody programs this kind of racism into the computer. It occurs because the data is faulty. Black people are typically sicker at the time they go to the hospital. So at the time of admission to ICU, at the time of admission to wards, at the time of admission to emergency care, using that as a normalization strategy, you would simply misrepresent the risks. And this is something that is very obvious when you think about India. The level of sickness for a person being admitted to AIIMS in a public hospital versus, say, to a private hospital. Similarly, I talked to you earlier about the use of synthetic data, synthetic conversations. Beautiful paper just a few months ago, showing that you lose complexity when you try using recursively generated synthetic data. If you start with reality and you keep generating more and more synthetic data to avoid the problem of getting ethical approvals and things like this, very soon you lose the complexity. Your probable events become overestimated and uncommon events become underestimated to the point that AI will be great at common things. It'll do great with exams, but it'll never miss a easy standard type of patient. But many of us became physicians, good physicians, to take care of that rare black swan. And that the AI will not be able to do most of the time, unless it is trained differently. And it did well in some cases in the NEGM, but it's trained differently. And also, there's going to be a huge industry of digital twins in time to come. The original twin was with Apollo 13. Apollo 13, 200,000 miles away when the system failed because an oxygen cylinder blew up. Lights were going on. They couldn't figure out what the lights meant except by going back to Houston, NASA. Houston, we have a problem. So many movies. And they could figure out what the lights meant using the twin over here. But that was a physical twin. Today, we have digital twins. The Porsche Taycan has a digital twin of the suspension. As it bounces over the roads and the speed breakers in Delhi, it will go for service faster than somewhere outside. Of course, one day it might just come out of the showroom and go right back after the very first big bump. People have now made digital twins for the heart. With apologies to any cardiologist who is attending, but if there was one simple organ meant for making a twin of, it's the heart. It's electrical, it's mechanical. Both these things we understand how to model. But look at the complexity of the models. Once upon a time, people built virtual heart technology for guiding ablation for VTACs. Last year, they showed how they could combine multiple types of information coming out of pacemakers, mapping systems, cardiac MRIs, prediction of circuits, and genetic information all together to do the same thing even better. So this was a full virtual twin of a heart that even included structural, genomic, physiological, electrical information. Multi-omics profiling for health has started. All kinds of omes are now possible. I'm not going to spend much time on this, but this is the direction that one entire field of medicine is going to move into, which is going to bring you new types of therapies that we can't even imagine today. But this massive collection of data that will occur should be concerning to anybody who thinks about these things. And Dilbert is one of my favorite cartoon strips, and I think I will not expand upon the implications of what is said in this cartoon. There'll be too many people who pretend to care about people's health, wanting to collect data, and we need to be aware of that, especially with the privacy rights. I had the opportunity to co-chair a commission in which we talked about these rights, and we tried to point out that this is a very divided place. As we try to apply digital health and AI, we must solve problems at all these levels. We must deal with systems that are only digitized. In fact, AIIMS is also mostly only digitized, where most of the workflow is analog, and at most you can get a scan of that. AIIMS ICUs might be digitalized, but a complete digital transformation, while India is making rapid steps, our healthcare system is still far behind. So coming back to the questions I tried to address to a level but didn't quite. How will AI change healthcare? The first part, which I think I spent a lot of time on, and I hope I've convinced you all, AI is going to bring a lot of new discoveries for health science, giving us tools and options that don't exist today. At the second level, perhaps most relevant to the people attending, it will bring agency and insights to both practitioners and beneficiaries. I see this panning out in a variety of ways, but two I want to list to you to think about. As AI goes direct to beneficiary for simple consultatory things, there is a potential that AI will bypass practitioners, especially in non-prescriptive areas to do with wellness. Second, within our own community, AI-supported practitioners, as long as they have the license and accreditation given to them, can displace most specialized practitioners. In the area of radiology, the question I would ask you is, would a doctor who is not a radiologist, given tools of radiology and high-quality AI, be able to displace some radiologists, not all radiologists, not the super specialized, top of their field people, but the routine radiologists? Would doctors start investing in just having better and better tools as opposed to going for further training in those areas? I do not know the answer, but I'm very happy to discuss it with time. Anything that's a simple repetitive task is going to move from humans to AI, and humans will move to flexible, complex tasks. And for example, a job that is as simple as a nurse calling in patients for reminders, checking they took their medication. Today, there is a nurse agent in the Bay Area that can have a conversation with a patient in fully human voice, talking to them about the weather, during the conversation, asking all the questions that are on the list to be asked, leaving the patient, the old patients typically very happy about the conversation while quickly crossing off the checklist. And I'm going to end with this. There is a very famous book by Ray Kurzweil, The Singularity. The Y is cut off. The singularity is near. And the future will be far more surprising than most people realize. Questions I would say are worth asking today as opposed to later. What will society be like in the time of AGI? I think it is safe to assume the theoretical barriers to AGI will fall within this decade, and practically globally scalable AGI will be expected within our lifetime. What would the practice of medicine be like? And perhaps we should look at StarTech for inspiration. But one thing I'm certain as I read these areas, the best path for a human to winning in the age of AI is simply to be more human. And with that, thank you all so much.
Thanks, Anurag, for scaring us a bit and then reassuring us also in the end. So before the questions come on, in conclusion, where are we in the hype cycle?
Okay. So on the hype cycle, I think we've already crossed the valley of death. From this point, there is not going to be a sudden collapse of AI. What you will see is a collapse, perhaps, of some types of generative AI promises, but you will not see a collapse of AI in general. So what you will see is things like QXR, many other things get better and better, move towards some degree of autonomous readings, while the promise of GPT in becoming a doctor for everybody will go down and then will come up again as we build combination foundational models. But by 2030, I would fully expect a GPT type of a doctor to outperform at least a typical human doctor.
So I also think it may give you the potential to expand services from radiology point of view as X-ray goes away, suppose to AI, like which is the reality of today. It also means there's a potential to increase population-based screenings, which are not limited by reads. So
absolutely. So that's what I meant by direct to beneficiary. So many smaller technologies will just go direct to beneficiaries between companies and them, and leaving practitioners out of the loop. And wherever the screen is positive, the patient will come back into the loop. And I think that's a very good way of scaling services, because we know that healthcare is plagued by shortages. So to be honest, I would say it's an ethical use as well. And it's heavily disputed and contested, but to my mind, in a country where we accept shortages and we are willing to create what we call barefoot doctors or village doctors with limited training, why not try this and compare and then let the evidence speak for itself?
But in terms of, do you think that how much should this research be regulated? Is it like it's like nuclear energy having immense
Elon Musk
potential, but you
variation.
need to curtail it?
So let me give you a very frank answer on this, because I'm India's nominee to the GPA, and I'm on the responsible AI subgroup. So I had a choice whether to sign that letter or not, on a moratorium for such research. India does not want such research to be stopped, a moratorium to be placed. Why would you want the race to stop when you are far behind and with the hope of catching up? So I think at a country levels, I don't think one can afford moratoriums, because these are areas where people will continue. All that will happen is this research will go underground, not on the surface, and people will not benefit. There are historical precedents for this. The Manhattan Project of nuclear fission was a very good example of when everything went underground and yet everything leaked. And a few countries ended up with technologies, others didn't. So learning back from the nuclear race and the Manhattan Project, we know exactly what a moratorium accomplishes.
So what about any questions from the audience? Do we have any questions?
Encourage some of the younger lot, our residents. Why don't you go ahead?
I think Neil raised a hand, sir.
Neil, please go ahead.
So I would like to ask,
Yes,
hello.
please.
Yeah. So how would it change our perspective as a radiologist? Like if a radiologist know AI and use it in its own application, how would it change its practice? Matlab?
Yeah. So I'm going to simply borrow from my wife's standard last slide. AI will not, displace radiologists. Radiologists who use AI will displace other radiologists who don't use it. But I think all radiologists are using AI anyway, to some degree or the other, the minute they look at an image. And I would actually argue that radiology is not the field under most threat, because radiology also has an element for which the patient comes in for imaging and controls the entire ecosystem of imaging. I think radiologists, by focusing on the high-end areas, which are difficult imaging, will always stay one step ahead, which is difficult to interpret. It'll take a huge amount of time for people to build scalable, appropriate, accurate models for autonomous versions, and only X-rays are anywhere even near for that. Even in that, it's the findings that AIs are good with, not necessarily the full interpretation. So findings are only a small part of the job of a radiologist. But radiologists who are findings people, as opposed to after the findings you write, please correlate clinically, well, that's going to suffer. But radiologists who are thoughtful clinicians, looking at the entire picture, I think have no threat from AI anytime soon, especially in complex areas.
Yeah, detection alone, if you are living,
Yeah.
making your livelihood out of detection alone, that is going to go.
Absolutely.
And so you have to move beyond it.
Yeah, because then a guy who's simply a doctor who's not a radiologist, who can buy the latest AI tools, can also find the findings. So I think those people are under threat, but most good radiologists will not be under threat anytime soon. I see a hand up by Sanil.
Sanil, please go ahead.
Hi, sir. Am I audible?
Yes, absolutely.
Sir, so my question is on a slightly lighter-hearted note, since you've already covered the nitty-gritties of radiology and AI. Sir, Dr. Geoffrey Hinton is known in popular culture as the father of doomerism in AI. I'm not. I mean, he's been in the news recently due to the Nobel
very
Prize.
often.
Sir, so from doomerism, I come to you were talking about 90s pop culture in terms of Star Trek and all. Sir, you must be familiar with the movie Terminator and the concept
Yes,
of
of
Skynet.
course.
So
Of course.
is there, sir, and you rank among the upper echelons of artificial intelligence in India. So is there, has the defense sector already deployed artificial intelligence applications? And
I won't know anything about the
Yes.
defense sector, but I'll be very surprised if they haven't. I'll give you a reason why. 10 years ago, when I was starting to get into this area and I was covering some parts of autonomous warfare through a friend of mine who's currently the special envoy to the UN Secretary General, Israel already had enemy tank recognizing autonomous drones that could shoot things down. So defense has been so far ahead on AI compared to others. I would be shocked if Indian defense was not working in those areas. But now coming to your larger question, so Skynet is a sentient AI that's beyond even AGI, right? AGI is simply AI with human level capacity for all kinds of learnings. While sentience of thinking independently and understanding that I am separate from my creator or something like this is another level altogether. So yeah, Elon Musk is there, Geoff Hinton is in that category. On the other hand, Jan LeCun, etc. aren't. But one thing always remember, consumerism trumps doomerism. So no matter how doomerist you are, the fact that AI is going to be part of a consumerist society will keep driving development. Is it possible something like Skynet might ever come? How can anybody ever say no? But we aren't anywhere close to that. We will be lucky to get to AGI within this decade, and to true sentient AI, I don't know when. I would actually imagine that cybernetics, human AI fusions would occur before that. So pure separated AI may never occur.
I think Nidhi has a question. And in terms of defense, I think they are using what is rumored is the facial recognition for the drones that are being dropped
Yes.
currently.
I'm sure.
That's what's doing the rounds. Nidhi, you wanted to ask something?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. Sir, I wanted to ask that you have already discussed the use of AI in manuscript writing and how it is advantageous and have its own disadvantage in manuscript writing. Does it already being used in doing peer review from
Yes,
the reviewer side?
absolutely. It shouldn't be, but it is. And so when I say it shouldn't be, let me again qualify my comment. Is it okay to also have Chat GPT? Well, first of all, let me divide into two parts. When you're doing peer review, you're reviewing confidential material, right? So one reason not to put it on an AI service like Chat GPT is because it's confidential. Now leave that out for a second. So for that reason alone, you should not use it. But assume for a second that what you are looking at is not a confidential, you're doing a journal club or something like this, you're reviewing it. You're reviewing it for your own group for a published paper. Then as long as you are reading it and you are passing it to GPT to parse it, there is no problem. You can use it to summarize, but at the end, you have to take responsibility for everything that you say.
So we have a lot of hands up. We'll take quick comments from, maybe we'll take everybody's questions and Anurag can answer once together.
Sure.
Chandan?
Chandan, please go ahead.
Yeah, good evening, sir, and many congratulations for the excellent lecture. So you were saying that attention is all you need, and you were asking the radiologist to use transformer to transform.
Okay, we'll take that at the end. I know what I'm going to answer to that.
Krishna?
Yes, sir. Thank you so much. So the lecture was really good. You spoke about how AI has already been implemented to report normal X-rays. So I just wanted to know how have they handled the legal aspect of it. So is the company that should develop the software responsible for any implications, or is it the hospital or the particular doctor who's using the deploying the software?
We'll ask Yashasvi also, and then Anurag can respond.
Thank Thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, is there a role, sorry, sir, is there a role of AI in interventional radiology yet?
AI and interventional radiology. Okay, let's take all of them. So first one is, of course, more of a comment on a very famous paper, Attention is All You Need, based on which transformer architecture came. And yes, it is going to be transformative, but not because of in itself the attention is all you need paper. The transformer architecture simply allowed us to see of long distance effects. But the real thing that has come is not understood well. So Peter Lee, in an interview to the NEJM, talked about the fact that he knew something big was occurring when they used transformers to look at LLMs. Let's forget transformers now. Transformers is the architecture. LLMs to look at mathematical equation. Now, using AI theory, you can train an AI with millions of examples of 3 or 4 variable equation. It can't suddenly learn to solve a 5 variable equation unless it's been trained. What happened is when OpenAI was doing all this, they fed a lot of text, and the text is not maths text. And right after trained only with text, it started being able to learn to solve higher order equations than previous. So somewhere in the structure of knowledge of languages and stuff lies things we don't even realize, which basically means none of us really know what these things can do, which also goes back to that Skynet reference also. So yes, I think it's transformational, but not because of the logic of transformers in terms of attention, but because of these emergent properties of training on large data sets that, at least as far as I know, nobody fully understands. Then I'll take the last question, which was on interventional radiology and AI. Certainly, even if you're intervening, you are looking at images, processing them. Even, in fact, one could argue that you could even get knowledge support in terms of the best approach to take in a complex case. It could almost be a coach in the room for people who are less experienced. So a lot of training could come into that. I mean, there is already a wonderful AI that can look at a surgery and mark the surgery for steps that needed to be accomplished and rate the quality of the surgery on those parameters. It's going to be an absolute nightmare for legal issues. You can almost imagine that lawyer firms will ask for surgeries videos and ask to see whether certain checkpoints were met or not met. Which brings us to the last question, that is also legal, which is about who takes liability for a normal report. It'll be a combination of a contract between Occipit and the hospital, I would imagine. I do not know the answer for certain, but I also asked the same question earlier. And I was told the hospital that buys the Occipit software also takes over some of the liability. And in case Occipit turns out to make clearing errors, their contract to the hospital in turn will pass some liability to them. But it's not something I know directly.
I think we've taken all the questions. Sir, any closing comments before we let Anurag go for his evening walk?
Sorry, I was muted. We really need to convey our thanks to Anurag. He has just come back from Europe this morning and in spite of his jet lag, agreed to give this talk. So many thanks, Anurag. Very insightful talk and very grateful for your time.
Thank you very much. Absolute honor and a pleasure to be here, and wonderful questions. Thank you all.
With that, we'll close the session. Thank you again. Thank you everyone for logging in.